he almost didn't open the door. It was late. He was tired, and he had spent the entire day arguing with a contracte. WHO kept telling me the kitchen floor would probably be fine without preppers healing probably the wet of a man. WHO had never owned anything wet protecting. Yet moved to Charleston 3 weeks earlier, and the house on Birwood Lane was still more project than me. Back suspecting corners, one waking beneath the stove, a bedroom faucet that dripped in aridam just irregularly enough to keep me awake. I had left Houston with 2 suitcases, a bruised up the action, and a quiet promise to myself that this time I would build something that actually lasted. So, no, I was not in the mood for company. But the knock came again. Patient and hate, the kind of knock that belongs to someone who is used to waiting on other people and has made peace with it. I opened the door. She was standing under my porch light, with her hair falling loose on her shoulders. An oversized jacket pulled over what I was pretty sure was Krupp's and an expression that was apologetic and exhausted in equal measure. She was holding a small flashlight in one hand. Not to borrow one, I realized, but to return one she had apparently found on the summit belonged to the previous owner. She blinked. I blinked. I think he left this here last week, she said slowly, then stopped. Wait, you're not Mr. Garfield. No, I said I'm Owen. I moved in about 3 weeks ago. Something crossed their face. Not embarrassment exactly, more like a quiet recalibration of some earner. WHO is set to processing new information quickly and moving on. Claire, she said, I live next door. I'm sorry about the knock. I thought the Garfields were still here. That's all to me, I said. She nodded once. Then, instead of leaving, she looked past me into the house. Not rudely. Just a wipe up though, when they're trying to understand the space, they hadn't expected to find unfamiliar. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, she said. Tell me something I don't know, I replied. And for the first time since she had knocked, she almost smiled. That was a Thursday. Visitor D. I know 3 things about Dr. Clea Lawson. 1. She left for work before last 6 in the morning and rarely returned before 8 at night. 2. She received more package deliveries than any single person reasonably should. 3. She argued on the phone in her driveway with the particular cam up someone who had landed, raising her voice caused more energy than it was worth. She never yelled. She just got quiet, more precise, until the person on the line y the agreed or hung up. So the man next door and decide. A retired school teacher named Walter was made to know everything about everyone on Birwood Lane without any apparent effort. Filled me in over the fence on the afternoon while he was sending the porch railing. Claire Lawson, I said, leaning on a garden, how like it was a walking stick. Gynecologist over Trope St. Francis, been here about 4 years. Good neighbor, quiet, works too much. Epos, comes from good people, her father's George Lawson. You might have heard of him. I had not. Walter seemed mildly surprised by this. Old Charleston family. Very connected. Very, except for the wet particular. I thanked him for the information and went back to sending. The next time I spoke to Clea was on a Tuesday evening. I was on my porch with a cold drink and a set of architectural plans I was supposed to review for a client in Mount Pleasant when her car pulled in next door. She got out, so that I chauffeur drove away for a moment doing nothing and then sat down on her own porch steps in a way that looked less like rest and more like sand. She didn't go inside. She just sat there with her back beside her, staring at the option in her front yard like it owed her an explanation. I don't know why I said anything. Maybe it was the stillness of it. Maybe I recognized the particular exhaustion of a peasant who had been strong for everyone else all day and had nothing left to perform by the time they got to me. Rough day, I called over. She looked at me like she had forgotten the street existed. Then she let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep. I had a delivery that didn't go the way it was supposed to. She said, everyone's okay, but she stopped it. Yeah, rough day, I nodded. I didn't push. I went back to my plans about 10 minutes passed before she spoke again. What are you working on? And just like that, without either of us deciding anything, the conversation began. She told me about the delivery, not the clinical details, but the feeling of it. So wait time slows down in a room when something is going wrong and everyone is looking at you because you are the one who is supposed to know what to do next. I told her about leaving my position at a large firm in Houston to start my own practice in Charleston, about the specific area wanting something badly enough to risk being bedetted for a while. She listened to way people rarely do without planning her next sentence while he was still talking. We sat on our separate porches like that for almost 2 hours. When she finally stood to go inside, she paused at her door and looked over. Owen, she said. Yeah, the porch railing on the left side of your steps is about to come off. You should fix that before someone grabs it. I looked at it. She was right, thanks, I said. She went inside. I stood there for a moment in the quiet dark of Birwood Lane. listening to the sound of cicadas and a distant dog barking somewhere down the street. And it talked about the way she had said my name, like she had already decided it was worth remembering. Se follow into Wex moved in arida me hadn't expected. Not a romance, not exactly, more like the Wopple slowly figuring out that the other one was safe. She started leaving a few minutes later in the mornings. Started making enough coffee for two without thinking about it. She knocked one afternoon to skip had a double range that fit a specific pipe fitting and the kitchen sink. It came over, fixed it in about 4 minutes, and stayed for another hour because she had apparently been attempting to cook something that smelled extraordinary. And he made a mistake of saying so out loud. She fed me. We talked about Charleston. She had lived here long enough to have opinions, and he had arrived recently enough to have questions. She told me which neighborhoods were worth exploring and which coffee shops were overrated and overhyped. He told her about a rooftop he had found while scouting a renovation project that had a view observer that made you feel like the city had been placed there specifically for you. You should show me sometime, she said casually, like it didn't matter, but it did. I could see it in the way she looked away right after she said it, like the words had come out slightly ahead of her intention. She picked up her mug and moved the conversation forward before he could respond, steering us back to something easy and safe. And he let her because he was doing the same thing. Because here's the part one hadn't admitted to myself yet. I wasn't just enjoying the company of my neighbor. I was rearranging my evenings around the possibility of it. I was noticing the sound of her car in the driveway, the way you notice a song you didn't realize you'd been waiting to hear. I was fixing things around my house at a slightly faster rate than necessary because she had a good eye for detail and I wanted her to see progress. I was despite a very quiet promise I admitted to myself in Houston falling, and I was fairly certain I was not the only one. But here is where it gets complicated. One evening, a Friday, warm even for Charleston in the fall, I was walking back from picking up supplies 2 streets over when I saw a silver sedan parked in Clara's driveway. A man in a pressed shirt was at her door tall, confident pasture, second of peasant. WHO looked like he had never doubted his own right to be wherever he was standing. Clea opened the door. She did not look surprised to see him. She did not look particularly happy either, but the distinction from where he was standing was not easy to read. I kept walking. I went inside. I sat down my supplies and stood in my half-finished kitchen for a moment, looking at the one working beneath my stove and told myself it meant nothing. But I left my porch light off that night for the first time since he had moved in. Andy noticed, lying awake later, that he could not stop thinking about who he was. He found out who he was by accident. Walter was in his front yard the next morning, doing what Walter always did on Saturday mornings, which was water his garden beds with the slow matada calde da que shanaba men who had nowhere more important to be. He crossed the street to return a level he had lent me 2 weeks earlier, and before he had even handed it over, he looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has information and is waiting for the right moment to offer it. So Preston waits car over at Claire's last night. He said, not as gossip, more as a weather observation. I don't know who that is, he said. Walter looked mildly unsurprised. Cardiologist works out of MUSC. George has been trying to get those two in the same room for about 2 years now. Accepted the level back, examined it briefly, and set it against his porch. Good family. Preston's people and the Lawsons go way back. In nodded like this information was neutral to me. It was not. He went home and spent the morning doing something he was extremely good at when he was trying not to think about submitting. He worked. He pulled up the project files for the Mount Pleasant renovation, spread the plans across the dining table, and committed to being a peasant who was focused entirely on load-bearing walls and window placements and absolutely nothing else. It worked for about 40 minutes. Then Clea knocked. She was in running clothes, a grey long sleeve shirt, hair loose on her face from a run she had clearly already finished. She slickly flashed. She was holding 2 cups from the coffee place and Morris and Wright. So one she had told me was the only one in the neighborhood with the detour, and she was holding one out toward me before he had even fully opened the door. I went past your street twice on my run, she said, and took myself out of stopping both times. Then I decided that was a stupid thing to do. I stepped back and let her in. We sat at my dining table among basketed plants, and she wrapped both hands around their cup the way people do when they want something to hold on to. She looked at the drawings for a moment. Is this the Mount Pleasant project? Yeah, I said. The clients want to open up the backway entirely. Take the whole thing to glass. She studied the plans with more focus than I expected. That's going to pull in a lot of afternoon heat. I'm trying to convince them to offset it with a deep overhand. She nodded slowly, still looking. I like that you think about how people are actually going to live in a space, she said, not just how it looks in a drawing. I looked at her. How do you know you do that? She glanced up. Because of what you did with the porch layout sketch you showed me last week. You put the chair placement in before the furniture was even chosen. She said it simply like it was obvious, like she had been paying close attention, then I realized. We started like talking about the project, about design, about the way a building can either work with the people inside or against them for almost 10 hours. And I almost didn't bring it up. I almost let the morning stay exactly as easy as it was. But the Silvesa then was still sitting somewhere in the back of my mind, and eventually the question found its way out. Semen at your door last night, I said carefully. Not accusatory, just out loud. She didn't flinch. She wrapped her hands tighter around her cap. But she said, Walter mentioned him, Walter mentioned Severgione, she said, but not unkindly. She was quiet for a moment. He's a family friend, has been for a long time. My father likes the idea of us being more than that. And you asked. She met my yes. I like having coffee with me neighbor on a Saturday morning. She said it wasn't a declaration, but it was a meeting. So we accepted it was a map the best I could remember in a long time. Not because anything dramatic happened. It was almost the opposite. It was the ordinary accumulation of small things that build a life with someone before you've named what you're doing. She started texting me when she was leaving the hospital. Not for any particular reason, just because. I started timing my evening walks to coincide with her itenome. Also for no particular reason, also just because we went to the harbor of Tap one Sunday afternoon. So when I had told her about over dinner at her kitchen table, and she stood at the railing, looking out over the water, while I stood slickly in her thinking that I had been in Charleston for almost 2 months. And this was the first moment it had genuinely felt like home. But there were cracks forming in the easy version of things. Her parents had a dinner, the kind of dinner that is called casual, but is not the kind with cloth napkins and the sitting arrangement that communicates hierarchy without anyone saying it out loud. Clea had mentioned it twice in passing, and both times had ended the mention quickly like she was hoping I hadn't registered it. I had registered it. When she came home that Sunday night, she knocked on my door later than usual. Her expression was the careful, neutral kind that people wear when they are managing something they haven't processed yet. How was dinner? I asked. Fine, she said. Then after a pause, Preston was there. I waited. My father made a toast, she said. ITWASNTSOVTL. I didn't say anything. She stood in my doorway, looking at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. And for the first time since I'd moved to Beerwood Lane, the space between us felt uncertain in a way it hadn't before. I don't know what he expects me to do, she said quietly. What do you expect yourself to do? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. The porch light caught the edges of her hair. She opened her mouth, then closed it like the answer was there, but not yet ready to be spoken. Then her phone rang, a hospital number. She looked at it, looked at me, and took the call. Stepping off the porch and into her driveway with the focus shift off Somernewo becomes a different version of themselves the moment a patient needs them. I watched her walk away, phone pressed to her ear, already somewhere else entirely, and I stood in my doorway on Birchwood Lane, wondering whether what was growing between us was strong enough to survive the weight of everything pressing against it from the outside. I didn't have an answer yet, but I was beginning to understand the thing that one. She stopped knocking. That was the first thing I noticed after that Sunday night. Not a dramatic exit, not a conversation that ended badly, just a quiet withdrawal, the kind that happens so gradually you almost convince yourself it isn't happening at all. The coffee visits slow. The text came later and said less. She still waved from the driveway, still smiled when we crossed paths at the mailbox. That's a version of Clea that had sat at my dining table, studying architectural plans and talking about how people actually live inside spaces. That version had gone somewhere I couldn't follow. I gave her room. That was my first instinct, and I still think it was the right one. I didn't push. I didn't show up at her door with questions she hadn't invited. I just kept my porch light on and let her know without saying that I wasn't going anywhere. But the distance settled into something heavy as the days stacked up. I threw myself into work. The unpleasant project that hit a complicated phase. The clients had changed their minds about the glass wall 3 times in 2 weeks. And coordinating between the structural engineer and the contractor required the kind of patience that left me to tiring. The evenings to do much besides sit on the porch with something cold to drink and watch the street go. Kate Walter waved from across the way. A family 2 doors down got a new dog that had opinions about everything. Life on Beerwood Lane continued its ordinary rhythm, and I moved through it like a man waiting for something cool in Tename. Then on a Wednesday evening, things took a turn I hadn't expected. I was coming back from a site visit, still in my wet clothes, when I saw Clara's car parked at an Adengaliner drive away. Not the way she usually pulled in, straight and delivered, but crooked, like she had stepped in a hurry. Her front door was slightly open. That alone made me slow my pace. I knocked on the door frame. Clea. A bit of silence. Then in here, she was sitting on the kitchen floor, nothing yet, nothing danger, just sitting on the floor with her back against the cabinet, and her knees pulled up, still in her white coat, staring at a point on the tile between her feet. There was a glass of water on the counter above her that she clearly hadn't touched. The refrigerator met, a faucet dripped somewhere. I sat down on the floor across from her without being asked. I didn't say anything. I just sat there the way she had once sat on her porch steps after the hard delivery, needing the company of another person without needing them to fix anything. After a while, she said, I had a patient today, Jan, 26. Came in alone because she didn't want to wake her family yet. She stopped it. She's going to be okay. But there were about 40 minutes in the room where I wasn't sure. I let that sit. I'm good at my job, she said quietly. Not boasting, just stating a fact she needed to hear herself say. I know I'm good at it, but some days the weight of being the peasant everyone counts and to stay calm. It just find somewhere to land eventually. And tonight it landed on your kitchen floor, I said. She looked up at me for the first time since I'd come in. Something in her face shifted, not breaking exactly, more like releasing. I miss talking to you, she said. Those 5 words did more than an hour of explanation could have. I've been right here, I said. She nodded slowly. I know, I think that's what scared me. It wasn't the moment for a big conversation. I could feel that clearly. So, I stood up, washed my hands at her sink, and opened her refrigerator to see what she had. She watched me from the floor with an expression somewhere between confused and grateful as I found enough to make a simple pasta. Nothing impressive, just something warm and real. She got up after a few minutes and sat at the kitchen table. Cooked, she talked. Not about Preston, not about her father, not about any complicated external pressures. Just about her day, her patient, the small kindness and urge had shown her in the hallway that she hadn't been able to stop thinking about. By the time we sat down to eat, the kitchen felt like somewhere people actually lived. Later, when he was washing up and she was leaning against the counter nearby, she said it quietly without looking directly at me. My father has made it very clear what he thinks my life should look like. And for a long time, I told myself I was just being a beautiful daughter by listening. She paused. But there's a difference between listening to someone and handing them your future. It end of the tap and turned down. I'm not asking you to choose anything tonight, I said, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, it should be yours, not your father's, not anyone else's. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and hugged me. Not dramatically, just a simple real answer of semi-dull kind of hug. The kind that means I needed this and I trust you and thank you all at the same time. I stood very still and held on. 3 days later, she called her father. It wasn't there for the call, but I had about it afterward, sitting on my porch steps while she sat on his, both of us, with the going cold in our hands. She had told him that she wasn't going to pursue anything with Preston, that she needed him to respect it, that she was 34 years old and had built her career entirely on her own terms, and she intended to do the same with her personal life. George Lozan had not taken it well. How bad? He asked. I didn't shout. She said he was worse than that. I got very quiet and very for magic. I was closing a file. She looked at her cup. I said he hoped he knew what he was doing. Do you? He asked. She looked over at me. Yeah, she said. I think you what you do. So we accepted it when not simple. George Lozan made his displeasure known through the slow, suffocating methods available to amenab his standing. I would hear a withdrawn introduction there. 2 of Clara's colleagues mentioned in passing that they'd had her father had concerns about her focus lately. It was never direct enough to confront. It was the kind of pressure that works by making the heavy, not be saying anything out loud. But Claire did not shrink. She went to work. She delivered babies and studied frightened patients and made hard calls and came home tired and drilled and increasingly undeniably herself and slowly without fanfare. She started showing up on my porch again, not tentatively, not apologetically. But 3 days of someone returning to a place they had decided to stop living, one evening, we drove out to Sullivan's Island and walked along the beaches. The light went flat and the water turned silver. She found a piece of seaglass and held it up against the sky, turning it in her fingers. I used to come here as a kid, she said. My mother brought us every summer, before everything got so managed. Managed? I repeated. You know what I mean? When you come from a family like mine, everything has a purpose, every dine, every introduction, every symmetry. It's not that it wasn't good. It's just somewhere along the way I forgot that it was allowed to want things that weren't already on the list. I picked up a flatstone and skipped it to Ise. What do you want that's not on the list? She was quiet for a moment, watching the water. This, she said simply, not dramatically, just a wet, but it landed with the weight of everything she hadn't been able to say for weeks. I reached over and took her hand. She led me. We stood there while the sky finished deciding what color it wanted to be, and neither of us said anything more. And it was the most honest moment I had experienced in longer than I could remember. But I would have known that peace, when it comes after long resistance, is rarely allowed to simply settle without an more thing having to test it. The very next morning, I opened my front door to find George Lawson standing on my porch. No warning, no call. Just a man himself in a jacket that cost more than my first month's rent in Houston, looking at me with the expression of someone who had made a decision and come to deliver it in person. I think we should talk, I said. I looked at him for a moment, then I stepped back and opened the door. Come in, I said. I didn't sit down right away. George Lawson stood in the middle of my living room. Among the architectural plans and semi-matched chairs and the bookshelf, I still hadn't leveled properly and looked around the space with the careful measuring expression of a man who was trying very hard to be fair and finding it more difficult than expected. I let him look. I didn't have a coffee immediately. Didn't rush to fill the silence. I just stood near the doorway and waited because I had learned enough about Petit Jaleka in Subman to know that the first one to speak usually loses the thread. Finally, I turned to face me. You know who I am? I said. Yes, sir. I said, then you understand why I'm here. I have a guess, I said, but I'd rather hear it from you. I looked at me steadily. I could see where Claire got it, that particular stillness, the ability to hold a room without raising a voice. My daughter has made certain things clear to me recently. Aside about her choices, about where her attention is. In that but said nothing. You want to understand what your intentions are. I said directly, no the courage you no need. To be honest with her, I said to be someone she can count on, to build something real, if she let me. I was quiet for a moment. That's a simple answer. It's a simple question, I said. Underneath all the complications, I sat down then, not in the good chair, but in the warm one near the window. Then always eating when he worked late. I sat in it like a man who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I have spent 30 years protecting her, I said, building a life under future. Preston is a good man, stable, known. I know, I said, and he meant it without bitterness. You're not what I planned for her, I said. No, he agreed, but I'm what she chose. Something moved across his face. Not agreement, not yet what a crack in uncertainty, like a wall that has held for a long time, beginning to understand that the pressure is coming from their own direction. I left 30 minutes later without resolving anything cleanly. There was no handshake, no blessing, no moving moment. I simply stood, looked. Under one more time, and said he appreciated that I had spoken plainly. Then he walked out and I stood at my window and watched his car pull slowly away from Birwood Lane. Clea called that evening. I had gone to see her after leaving my house. What did he say to you? She asked. That it wasn't what I planned for you. He said, Pause. What did you say? That you were what mattered, not the plan. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. I told me he needed time. She said that I was ready to pretend he had no conscience, but that he could see he wasn't going to move. Are you? He asked. No, she said. I'm not. 2 months passed. They were not easy months. They were taking the task something of you every single day and don't offer much reassurance in return. George Lawson kept his distance. John Lawson sent a brief, polite text when Claire mentioned we had attended a local architecture award ceremony together. Nothing warm, but nothing cold either. Preston White, from what he understood, had moved on gracefully, which made me respect him more than he expected to. The space that had felt so contested slowly began to breathe again. My firm picked up 2 new commissions in the same week. One, a residential renovation in second number 0 neighborhood. Another small commercial build near the waterfront. I hired an associate. The office, which had for months been a corner of my dining room, moved into a real space on King Street. Claire came to say it the first week, walked every room with that same careful attention she gave to everything, and stood in the main room with afternoon light coming through the tall windows and said it felt like somewhere good things would happen. I believed her. She had good instincts. Winter ate the way it does in Charleston. Gently without the hard jazz up called the places, Sair calling just enough to make evenings feel intentional. We fell into a life together that was not dramatic, but was deeply quietly good. She cooked at nights, she got home early. I handled the baby broke a normal functioning thing in both houses, which kept me reasonably busy. We argued twice, once about whether to get a dog, once about some meetings of mine I cannot now remember what it was. And both times, we resolved it without leaving the room, which felt like the most adulting I had ever managed. Then one evening in late November, Clea came home from work and sat across from me at the kitchen table with an expression I had not seen before. Not wait, not said, something more complicated than needed. She was pregnant, she told me without preamble, without softening it with anything before or after. Just the facts sitting between us on the table like something placed there carefully. I looked at her. She looked at me. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay, yeah. I said, okay, we figured it out together, she exhaled. A long slow release like she had been holding the breath since she'd found out. I didn't know how you would, Claire. I said, I'm not going anywhere. I thought I made that clear. She looked at him, a short surprise sound that was also almost crying. She pressed one hand over her eyes and sat like that for a moment. I reached across the table and waited until she put her hand in mine. George Lawson found out on a Sunday. Clea told him over lunch at her parents' house, just the three of them, which I think was the right call. She told me about it afterward, sitting cross-legged on my couch. And sitting that side with me was not what he said in the immediate moment, which was reportedly very little, but what he did those days later. He called me, not Clea, me. Asked if he would come to dinner that Friday, just the four of us. I said it without explanation or apology, simply as a man who had recalculated and was prepared to act on it. I said, yes, the dinner was the quietest significant thing I have ever said through. Lawson, whom he had not spent real time with before, turned out to be sharp and warm, then her formal public presence suggested. She asked about my work with genuine curiosity and made a point of showing me a photograph of a building in downtown Charleston that she had always admired without knowing who had designed it. It was an older project from the firm I had left in Houston, a building I had contributed to early in my career. I didn't mention that until she asked if I recognized it. When I told her, something opened up in her expression that had not been there before. George noticed it. I said nothing, but he noticed. Beyond that evening, nothing had been declared or resolved in any formal sense. But when George walked me to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame and said quietly, "She's strong, me doctor." She got that honestly. A pause. So did her instincts. It was the closest thing to a welcome I was going to get that night, and I knew it, and it was enough. Spring came to Charleston the way it always does. Suddenly, extravagantly, like the city had been saving itself up all winter, and finally decided to show off. Birwood Lane was all flowering trees and open windows, and the smell of someone's dinner drifting down the block in the early evening. We got married on a Saturday in April. Not a big event, a garden at a small inn outside the city. The kind of place with an even flagstone pets and old wisteria climbing the walls. Walter came, a few colleagues up Claire's, my associate from the firm and his wife. John Lawson cried before the ceremony started and tried to hide it behind her program. George stood beside her and did not cry, but he put his arm around her and they kept it there. Claire wore a simple dress de caleb cream and hair at her loose on her shoulders. And she walked toward me through the garden like a woman who had made her decision a long time ago and was simply arriving at the moment that formalized it. I had written something to say. I forgot most of it when I saw her. What I managed to say was, I opened the door on a Thursday night because I'm one act. I had no idea what I was letting in. She smiled. You fixed my sink on a Tuesday and stayed for an hour. I had no idea what I was doing either. The officiant finished the ceremony. We signed what needed signing. Someone somewhere nearby opened a bottle and made a sound of celebration. And on Birwood Lane, where two people had moved in next door to each other without any particular plan. A light that had once looked broken had found slowly and honestly, and without anyone's permission, its way towards something whole. Thank you. If this story gave you butterflies, don't forget to like and subscribe.